everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Fearcast. This is the podcast dedicated to OCD and anxiety spectrum disorders and getting your life back. I'm your host, Kevin Foss. I'm a licensed therapist specializing in OCD and anxiety disorders out here in California and also somehow licensed in Montana. I don't know. You can make that up why I'm doing that, but it's a secret. Anyways, thank you all for joining me for this podcast. So this is a question and answer based podcast, and I'm going to be answering a question today from you, from one of the listeners. So if you would like your question answered on a future episode, go over to fearcastpodcast.com. Send me a question over there by clicking on the submit a question link. You can also send an audio question that way by sending me the link to a shared Google Drive of it. You can send me the audio to questions@fearcastpodcast.com, or you can go over to Instagram. I am Fearcast Podcast over there, and you can just send me an audio over the DM that way. So either way, there are lots of ways to get me your questions, and today I'm going to be answering a question from Maya. Maya sent me a question recently. I'm answering one of the more recent ones instead of one of the archived ones. For no particular reason, I've been just kind of mixed things up. We haven't talked about Real Event OCD in quite some time, so I think that would be a good one to chat about. So we are going to delve into that in just a minute. So it's a bit of a longer question, so I'll be reading a little bit, but I hope everybody out there is doing well. Thank you all for letting me be a part of your recovery journey. I know that this podcast is kind of an oddball one in the sense that, just being question answer, you send me in your questions and I think about them and consider them and respond to them. But, I started this podcast a while ago, 6-7 years ago, something like that, with the idea that, there wasn't anything like this out there, that, therapy is hard to find. Good information and helpful information can be hard to find. And, it's hard to find someone who can perhaps answer some, a simple question, a hard question about OCD and kind of expand on that other than, the 5 minutes that you might get now in a Facebook live thing or an Instagram live thing. So I've appreciated doing this. I've really liked doing this podcast and being able to answer all these questions and just hearing the broad range of the way, OCD and anxiety spectrum stuff manifest. It's super fun. It's super interesting. It never gets old for me, and I hope it never does. So anyways, keep your questions coming. I'm going to keep doing this until I stop getting questions, and even then, I might still answer some questions after and just make them up. I'm not going to make them up. I do want to specify, I have never made up any of the questions on here. They started via Reddit, the OCD subreddit. I got some initial questions there and then started getting questions from listeners, and it's been snowballing from there. So again, it's been a fun adventure. All right. Why don't we just get into the question? So I'm going to say this question involves some sensitive topics for some, involves topics of grooming, involves topics of kind of secrets or potentially lying or things like that. So if you're particularly sensitive to that, or if you have kids who you don't want to necessarily hear that type of stuff, then you be the judge. You're the boss of you, not me, some ridiculous podcaster. All right. So here's the question coming from Maya. Maya says, "Hello, and thank you for taking questions. It makes the podcast so relatable and comforting to know that I'm not alone." Maya, that is another good reason why this podcast exists. And another good reason why I really, really like the audio questions when I do get those. Real people, real listeners are sending these in. So rather than just my ridiculous voice out there, I'd love to hear your voice. Anyways, Maya, here we go. So she says, "I have real event OCD and the compulsions to confess and to seek reassurance. I also experience extreme guilt. 2 weeks ago, I confessed something to my fiance that hurt his feelings. He told me, no more OCD confessions. Next time it wants you to confess, tell it no. Stop trying to ruin a good thing." And she says parenthetically, "We have a new baby and everything in life is going wonderfully. Don't you worry, Maya. OCD will have some words about that." All right, so she goes on to say, "Yesterday, he asked me if I have any more secrets I'm hiding, and he worries that I'm hiding something big. I lied and told him no. It was a lie because there's something else that has been causing me excessive guilt that I've debated telling him about. My therapist and friends told me that I don't need to tell him about it because it would cause unnecessary pain. It needs to be left in the past, and I've never had bad intentions. All right, so she's going to share it. So we're all going to decide whether or not her question to the podcast is confession or is reassurance seeking. You decide. Okay, so we're just going to get into that. So she says, in short, what happened was that last year I went back to work part-time and temporarily for a boss that I used to fool around with 7 years ago, but never slept with. I didn't think anything about it because it had been so long, and I have zero interest in him as I was pregnant. Okay, at this point, I'm just going to jump in and say, I'm interpreting this, and I think hopefully everybody else is doing this, but when I first read this, I was very confused. I'm going to assume you worked with him recently. You fooled around with him 7 years ago. You were not pregnant then, but you were pregnant recently when you were working with him. Okay, that's what I'm going with. Anyways, 5 months ago, he made some inappropriate conversation by telling me that telling me what his wife likes in the bedroom. He kept asking me questions about what my fiance are into, and I tried to redirect and share only non-sexual things about us. First off, good. Okay, good. All right, next. I get too shy and not assertive enough, so I answered a couple of his questions. I ended up quitting earlier than planned because of him. I feel so guilty for not cutting him off, not stopping him, and for going back to work there in the first place. My therapist and friend made me realize that this man has been conditioning me since early in my 20s to allow for his inappropriate behavior. So, when my fiance asked me if there was anything else I'm hiding, I said no, because I think that it's best for our relationship and our new family that I leave this in the past. However, I feel extremely guilty for lying about not hiding anything else when this not hiding anything else when this mistake I explained has been on my mind. I think that telling him no was actually telling OCD no. I want to be honest, but it would cause unnecessary pain and distrust. I'm afraid the guilt of lying will haunt me forever. Is there anything here I should tell him? What is the best solution for this? Thank you for reading. So Maya, thank you for sending in this question. Real Event OCD is tough. It's really tough because it feels like in some cases. In some cases, it just feels like. In some cases, it is. It is a moral decision that you are ultimately making here. And this is not to say that you are making an immoral decision one way or another, though OCD would like you to think about that. Sometimes in life, there is no good option. There is no good option sometimes. I tell everybody, when we're stuck between these two choices, some people get really upset or frustrated that they're, debating those questions and they're fighting with themselves and all this stuff. And they're like, I need to pick the right thing. It's like, if there was a right thing, you would have done it. You would have chosen it and you would have gone forward with it without even debating it. The reality is the two things that you're stuck between both have pros and both have cons. It's important to recognize that because it's not that you aren't able to find the right choice and that some smarter person or some less OCD person or some whatever person would be able to figure it out quickly. It's that sometimes there are no good choices. So ultimately, what we have to do is make a choice. We weigh the pros and cons and we consider things and you do what you did. You talk to your friend, you talk to your therapist, you weigh the pros and cons. And then ultimately we have to round up. Even if it's just 51% good and 49% kind of bad, and I'm using broad terms, good, bad, you know what I'm saying. We round up and we have to see where it goes. And it's and doing that, making the choice is the fighting against rumination. It's the fight against constantly going back to the same information, ruminating about the same stuff. We do think about things. We do consider good and bad and pros and cons and outcomes and other people's feelings and our values. But at some point, we will have to choose and then go and see how it shakes out. And between now and when it explodes, we sit with and deal with the feelings of uncertainty, the feelings of, it's unclear about what's going to happen. And oh man, I hope it turns out fine. And I hope, I dread the potential outcome. But we don't waste our time in that. We move forward trying to figure out the best thing in our life as best we can, right? And I say the best thing, it's like sometimes it's the best of a crappy choice, right? Or crappy collection of choices. So I know I'm getting a little ahead of myself perhaps, but again, it's very possible that kind of your podcast question was hoping to get some reassurance or some direct advice or guidance on exactly advice. The new word, everybody, advice. Or anyways, advice or guidance on what to do, as if to say that this podcaster here is going to know the right thing to do. I'm going to disabuse you of that, Maya, and everybody else there. I don't know the right thing to do because I don't think there is a right thing to do. There is a thing to do that you're going to do that you're going to move forward with. And there are going to be pros and cons to those choices, right? I will say, I'm proud of you for in that making a decision to say no at the time that you did, right? You got direct. First off, I'll say this. Let's go back. Your boyfriend, or your fiance, initially said like, no more OCD confessions, and then came back and was like, "Hey, I know I said no OCD confessions, but is there anything that you're hiding?" All right. I think that was kind of setting you up for something. I don't know if it probably was not malicious. I can't think that was a malicious or trying to put you in this kind of pickle. But I know, unfortunately, this type of thing can put you in a kind of a pickle. I'm wondering if, while he said no more confessions and, next time he wants you to confess, say no. I wonder if during that time you were in your head and he was observing it, he saw it, you in your head ruminating and doing a lot of mental compulsions. And I want to talk a little bit about some mental compulsions in a bit. But I wonder if that's what he was noticing, because then he said, he said, all right, if there are any more secrets, and he's wondering if he's hiding something big, right? And wondering if you were doing a lot of mental compulsions and in a lot of anguish and stress and guilt because this has been weighing on you. And he saw that. And, in the absence of information, and I think, you and I and all of us listening know, in the absence of clear, direct information, our brain is going to go everywhere in trying to figure out what in the heck it is. And oftentimes our ridiculous brain, in all of its wisdom and all of its stupidity, and, led by, magical anxiety, is going to fill in worst case scenarios. Right? It's important to recognize that that's, to a certain degree, that's what anxiety's job is to give you worst case scenarios so that you can avoid the worst case scenario or kind of prep yourself for something bad. But I wonder if that was happening for your boyfriend, and I'm sorry he set you up and you kind of fell into that trap. Anyways, so I'm proud of you for saying no when you did, but it served as a new trigger for this real event obsessions. And if you already have a history of real event, that kind of stinks. And this is that trade-off, right? You said no. Okay. Because you were honoring what your previous agreement was. No more confession. Great. And in a sense, that can be helpful. It might be helpful to also redefine how you can share things and how you can share things that may be weighing on you, because there may be a one and done type of discussion where you share something, a one and done confession. It's kind of, everything that we talk about can be used inappropriately and can be used compulsively. But in this instance, a one and done would be to confess something, or a one and done reassurance can be, asking for one reassurance about something, and then you're done asking it, right? So you could confess something and they could just simply say, okay, and you don't bring it up anymore. And okay may not feel as reassuring or confidence inspiring, but that's what you're going to do. And then you still have to deal with the uncertainty and anxiety and the worry and the intrusive thoughts that may come with that. All right. So there may be a discussion about one and done, and you can talk with your therapist about how to incorporate that, or how to work with your fiance about trying to find ways to communicate. Because guess what? Sometimes we have things on our mind. Sometimes we are stressed. Sometimes we have things that we do want to get off our chest. But if that reasonable and typical way of communicating, or that process, is also mixed with a giant gaggle of confessions and reassurance seeking and apologizing and checking and all of that, then he's going to be less interested in hearing that one and done, and that one and done is going to feel like it's compulsive and he ain't having it. Anyways, so what can you do? You said, is there anything here I should tell him? And what's the best solution for this? All right, well, I'm not going to just give you direct answers. I'm going to yammer on a heck of a lot more before I get into that. So here's a couple of things to consider. Number one, keep being aware of your compulsive patterns. Right? You said, what did you say your confessions were? Your compulsions were. It was confession and to seek reassurance. Awesome. So really being aware of what your compulsive patterns are is important. And also, what's the function of doing it? Right? Is it to gain intimacy? Is it to gain connection? Is it to share something about your life, or to learn something about his, or to kind of continue to build your life together and sharing information and becoming one, loving, doving, and all that stuff? Or is it at the behest of anxiety and OCD? Right? Is anxiety and OCD twisting your arm and forcing you into something that you ultimately, if anxiety and OCD wasn't there, you wouldn't be asking or saying or doing, right? So again, the question, the short way of saying that is, what's the function of the behavior that you're doing, right? Oftentimes for real event OCD, I don't know if I even said this before. For those of y'all who are not aware, real event OCD is a subtype of obsessive compulsive disorder. Real event focuses on something that actually happened, whereas a lot of the other obsessions, or a lot of the other subtypes of OCD, focus on something that hasn't happened, could happen, might happen. In the grand possibilities of life, it could happen, but it hasn't yet, right? A lot of times for real event OCD, it focuses on something that did. And then the brain focuses on, and anxiety centers around, what's going to be the fallout of that? Do I have to do anything about that? What is, how could that affect me in my life now? What does it say about me as a person? It can be very broad in that sense, but it focuses on something that actually happened. And that's what hooks some people into real event OCD, because they can point to that thing that happened that one time, because that thing happened that one time. Therefore, we have evidence to say there is a something there, right? As opposed to some of the other ones where it's like, if it's harm OCD, another subtype of OCD, where you're worried about hurting somebody, it is really hard to come up, for a lot of folks, it's really hard to come up with a distinct example of causing the tremendous pain that OCD suggests is likely to happen, right? Now, there can be some crossover, right? We can say there's harm OCD mixed with real event OCD, because you could say, all right, I said this thing to this person that one time and it really hurt their feelings, right? You could say, I was playing with my friend in 5th grade and we were playing a little too rough and I accidentally broke his finger. So I have evidence that I did hurt someone. I'm somebody that hurts people. Anyhow, so there can be crossover. And again, at the end of the day, all of this is just OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, a pattern of unwanted intrusive thoughts that causes anxiety that is then resolved through compulsive means to try to get reassurance, certainty, and comfort again. That's all it is. So then all the eccentricities and things within the subtypes. Anyways, so we're thinking about what's the function of the thing that you're doing. All right. Now, there can be external compulsions like reassurance seeking, where you're asking directly to him. There can also be mental compulsions, and I'm just going to go over a couple that we often talk about with our clients. And I'm just going to, if you're watching me do this on YouTube, by the way, I'm uploading these on YouTube so you can see my ridiculous face as we do this, if you're so interested. But so some of the ones that I'm wondering you might be doing in mental compulsions are compulsions that you're doing. They are mental actions that are done with the same function as an external or an overt compulsion, right? One of the ones that may be happening is emotional checking, right? Emotional checking, maybe. Let's see, what's one that would be more on the nose? I wonder if mental rehearsal might be one. Planning for a future event to gain certainty that you're going to do everything right. So it's playing out this story in your head. If I say this might happen. And then he'll say this, and then I'll do this, and then we'll do this, right? To make sure it's all going to be okay, right? Could be that. Certainly rumination can be happening. Rumination is thinking, considering, and problem solving without resolution or action. Right? It's going over, litigating all the same things. Did I do anything wrong? What did I do wrong? How could I have avoided this? What should I have done? And then once you come to a conclusion that everything's okay or have an action, you go back to the beginning and you relitigate over and over and over again without action, right? Action is an important thing in this. Another one that can be possible, I'm wondering if this might be happening, is scenario twisting. Scenario twisting is changing details from a past memory to evaluate their change on the current or future events. So in other words, playing something out from your past. So this event, right? This event with your former boss. Man, if I'd only said this, if I'd only done that, then my life would be different. My life would be better. I wouldn't be in this pickle and everything would be okay and nothing bad would happen in my life. The problem with all these is that they give you a false sense of security because we have no idea what's going to happen in the future and we can't change our past. All we can do is in this moment set ourselves up for success, whatever that might look like in the future. And that sometimes is a mystery. So, and sometimes we're just going to mess that up anyways. Okay, so those are some mental compulsions to consider, and there are other. I have an article on the Cal OCD website that goes over mental compulsions. My good friend Lauren Rosen is currently writing a book on this, and I will have her on when when the book is published to talk about mental compulsions and what to do about them. She is an avid speaker about mental compulsions, and she's fantastic. Go check her out. She has her own podcast. It's awesome. All right, so. I'm looking at my notes here. All right. So once you become aware of all the compulsions you're doing, internal and external, intentionally point out to yourself when you feel the urge to do them and to acknowledge that you can't predict the future. You can't guarantee that everything's going to be okay. You have to acknowledge in this, you know what? And one thing you can say is, some of those non-engagement responses, you can say, who knows, right? And say, we'll see. Maybe something will happen, maybe something won't, right? And I'm going to say that those options as things that you can do and say in the face of uncertainty that can let you off the hook of continuing to compulse and look for certainty. You can say, I don't know. So I have to make a choice and move forward in one way or the other. And we're going to see what shakes out. And then we'll deal with it when we get there. Right? So I'm wondering also, well, in this, so I want to address the groomed component a bit, right? So you certainly talked about that pattern. And one thing that I really want to encourage you to do is to catch yourself if and when you are shaming yourself, beating yourself up, raking yourself over the coals for what's happened. It's happened to you, not because of you. It hasn't happened because you wanted it. It hasn't happened because of any characteristic about yourself. There are people out there who unfortunately do this to others, and they might rationalize it one way or another, but it's simply not okay. He crossed so many boundaries in what he was talking about and how he treated you and the types of conversations that are appropriate within the workplace. Now, there may be people out there who are gonna disagree with me on that, and that's fine. But there's a professional boundary that unfortunately it sounds like he crossed, and he created an environment as if to say this is expected and okay for this work environment. So it sounds like in that as well, you might have been torn between your internal moral compass and maybe being pulled into what feels like, what is an okay and expected work environment. It may have felt at that time that you were being coerced into talking about various things, right? So there are a lot of things that could be happening, but what I want you to do is to listen to your friend and your therapist, and hopefully in that acknowledge that he put you in a place that was not okay, and I'm sorry you had to be in that place. And acknowledge if you are shaming yourself. In other words, saying you are bad, you are awful, you brought this on and you're at fault, right? That can speak really terribly to our character and make us feel awful. Instead, we can acknowledge what your part is and what his part was in that. His part is a lot. Your part is very little. We might be able to say, you know what? At that time, I didn't listen to my internal moral compass. Possibly. And this is not me. I'm making stuff up here. Okay. So Maya, if you were here, we'd be talking about this differently. We'd be able to get to more specifics. So I'm just kind of throwing things out there. I hope that that's all right. But we can think about, and I know I've talked about this before. It's the difference between shame and guilt. Brene Brown talks about shame and guilt and how if we can shift from shame language to guilt language, meaning I'm terrible, which is shame, to, I did something terrible, which is guilt. Did something terrible acknowledges that you did an action that in another circumstance you might do differently, right? Shame just says, this is who I am, and that's just all I am. Guilt says, I made a mistake. Because you know who makes mistakes? Everybody. Everybody. Me, you, everybody. Brene Brown makes mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes sometimes. And sometimes a mistake that we make is not listening to our internal moral compass, is sharing information that, deep down we go like, they don't need to know this information, or I don't want to share this, and they're not entitled to this information. But for one reason or another, one feeling, I'll just say one reason or another, we give in. We all make mistakes like that. Maya, let yourself off the hook and recommit to not making that mistake, quote, mistake in the future, and saying, you know what, I can do this differently in the future in another circumstance. And it sounds like in that, and again, the fact that you said you quit early because of him, good. So I think that in that's where I'm kind of hearing this back and forth of your values and morals and kind of this feeling, and eventually you kind of said, no, to heck with this, I'm done. Good. We can be in this push and pull and tug of war as people, and that's kind of that's kind of life sometimes. And that's kind of life with anxiety, and that's certainly, life with OCD as well, is kind of a push and pull between, immediate comfort and safety and the quote easy way out sometimes, and doing something hard, right? I've heard it said, and I think it's true, that anything following our values is hard. Following our values requires sacrifice and is difficult, right? Going against our values can sometimes be easy, right? Telling the truth or not doing a compulsion can be hard sometimes, every time, right? But it's important to do, and recognizing that. Okay. All right. I think I've said enough about that. All right. So, we could certainly also look at exposures with this, right? Of course, anxiety therapist, I'm going to talk about exposures to this. So in the exposures, so exposures to this would be exposing yourself to that feared outcome. Compulsions are going to be done to try to ensure that everything's going to be all right and nothing bad's ever going to happen and all that. So your life right now is going to be a giant exposure, right? So there's natural exposures, which is just life kind of giving us the exposure, right? Intentional active exposure, in vivo exposure, those are all going to be doing something, going out of your way to feel uncomfortable, all right? Both are acceptable, both are helpful, and both are necessary in the process of recovery. All right, so for you, the number one thing you should be doing, and everybody out there should be doing, is response prevention. It's the second part of exposure and response prevention, right? It's the RP part. It is resisting rumination, resisting compulsion, and trying to let that feeling be there, noticing how it feels in your body and letting that feeling resolve on its own, because it will. I promise, very few things in life. That anxiety, that uncertainty, that worry that you have will pass. The feeling will pass, whether or not you do compulsions, and I'm willing to bet it will go faster when you resist compulsions and re-engage with life in a meaningful way. Okay, so response prevention is going to be the first step for everybody out there. All right. So one of the things you can also do with this, again, is giving it in the face of anxiety, acknowledging that you do feel bad about you do feel bad, period. I'm not going to say feeling bad about the thing that you did or saying no to your fiance, but you can say, I feel anxious and I feel uncomfortable and I feel uncertain. And yes, you do, right? And you can say, but this feeling is going to go away. And also trusting that your partner, trusting that kind of discussion that you've had about, not giving into OCD, all right? So the first and foremost is to allow for that feeling and to practice getting good at feeling uncomfortable and learning that you can live life and feel uncomfortable and uncertain and not having all the answers. All right. You can certainly do active exposures where you intentionally write scripts or stories about telling him, about confessing fully to him, and him completely exploding, right? And your life exploding. You can write the opposite exposure too, that you choose not to say anything, and this eats away at your life, and you slowly start to grow apart because of just this wedge of anxiety and the weightiness of the truth that's just destroying everything, and you live your whole life just distant and apart from one another because you haven't told him this, and this is the singular thing that is stopping you from real, true intimacy. You know that real, true intimacy that everyone else seems to have, that everyone else in every movie, every friend you have has, that somehow you don't? Yeah, that's what you're having. And you live your entire life with that. Now, I'm going all bonkers with this. Point of all this is to say you can write both of the scripts, and both of those are probably going to be uncomfortable. That's the point of the script. And then sit with that discomfort and to know that that's a story and that you don't know. You don't know what's going to happen, right? Now, I'll also say this. You can also consider a values-based action. Now, you're in this push and pull between what I'm suspecting is values-based action of honesty. You feel bad that you're withholding this information. You do. But on the other hand, you say, well, it might cause unnecessary pain and anguish, right? So it's not perfect, right? If you give into one, if you say, you know what, I don't want to cause him unnecessary pain, so I have to sacrifice honesty in this by not saying something. If you're saying, you know what, I have to get this off my chest, and if it's your moral compass to say absolutely everything to somebody, okay, you're going to say honesty is the most important thing. Then in that moment, you're sacrificing the value of not causing unnecessary pain and anguish to somebody else, right? Values suck, man. This is why I keep telling people feelings suck. Feelings are the worst. Values suck too. And ugh. Anyways, that's all right. Too much of that. Point of all that is, there's a choice to be made, and you can also kick that can down the road until the anxiety of this resolves to where you can make a more clear decision based on this sacrifice and how you in that moment want to organize your values and how it feels best to you in that moment, right? We're all making choices here, right? So I know you said your friends and your therapist has said you don't have to. And you know what? No one is saying you have to. No one's saying that you should. But it's a choice to be made. I don't necessarily know what I would do in the same situation, right? Because it sounds like in this is that, you divulged a little bit more information that you really wanted to, and you feel bad about it. Okay. You could share that, right? Your partner has expressly asked if there was anything else, and, you are keeping this secret. And you're worried that telling him this, one, might make him upset because it could sound like a compulsion. It sounds like you're holding something back from him, which you may get upset about. You're sharing. You don't want to tell him because he told you not to, and then he told you to do it. There's not a lot of great answers here, right? So I wish I had a really good answer for you as to what thing to do about it. Sometimes what we do is we take that feeling and, we say, I'm going to hold on to this, and I'm going to say, we keep letting that feeling be there, and we ride that feeling, ride the wave of anxiety, and it's uncomfortable and it sucks, but that feeling is going to go away and your rational mind will come back. And then anxiety will come back and destroy that, right? I've talked about being anxious drunk in the past. Anxious drunk is my silly thing where it's like being regular drunk, right? Maya, have you been regular drunk? A lot of people have. Some people haven't. Good for them. So when you're regular drunk, you're not thinking very clearly. You make some silly decisions. You act on things you shouldn't do. And what we do is when we have to make a big decision when we're drunk, we sober up, right? Meaning we don't keep drinking. We step back from the booze. We go to sleep. We drink water. We eat Jack in the Box tacos. We have a Gatorade. Go to bed. Over some time, that hangover goes away. You're going to feel back to normal. You're going to be clear-headed, and then you can make a clear and better decision. Okay? So anxious drunk is the same. When you're overwhelmed by anxiety and you just feel like you need to do everything to get rid of that, instead, and especially when you're anxious and it feels like you have to make a decision, wait for that anxiety to pass, which means we step away from the thing that's causing us anxiety. When you're drunk, you step away from the thing that's causing you drunkenness. So you step back from the compulsion, the rumination, the confession, the reassurance seeking, and you wait. That feeling is going to pass, and you're going to be able to get back to who you are. And then you can consider whether or not you tell him. So I know it's up in the air, and I wish I had a clear answer for you. And maybe someone out there is going to be able to say, "No, you should totally just say it," or they're going to say, "You know what? It's nothing. Don't say it." Right? Who hasn't said something that they missed that was a mistake? Do they need to tell their partner absolutely everything? Right? To your point about or to the previous point about sacrificing honesty and unnecessary pain and anguish, the classic example, your partner comes to you and says, "Hey, honey, do I look fat in this?" The answer to that is always no. I don't care what they look like in that. The answer is no. And if you don't know that, somebody out there, the answer is no. Okay? Now, it may be lying to your partner or not being completely truthful to your partner. But you know what? That's kind of what we do, right? That's kind of what we can say. It may be the kind thing to say. It may be the slightly dishonest thing in some cases, but we all make choices. Again, we're all here making moral choices. So, all right, I think I've said enough about that. Maya, thank you so much for this question. I know Real Event OCD can be such a bear in the sense that you're having to make these moral choices, and it's hard. It's hard. And we might be wrong in our choice that we make. But hear me out when I say it's better to make a choice and move forward. And maybe it's going to explode on you, or maybe absolutely nothing's going to happen, rather than staying stuck in that ruminative place and never moving forward. So, Maya, again, thank you so much for that, and best of luck. Thank you for listening to the Fearcast. If you would like your question answered on a future episode, please click on the Submit a Question link at fearcastpodcast.com. If you would like your question answered sooner, please send me a recording of your question to questions@fearcastpodcast.com or by sending me an audio message through Instagram by DMing me at fearcastpodcast on Instagram. If you like the Fearcast, please write a review on your podcast platform of choice. Please remember that the Fearcast is not a substitute for psychotherapy. If you need a little bit of help in your recovery, please go over to fearcastpodcast.com and click on the Find Help link, and there's going to be some information for you there. So until next time, take a risk, challenge yourself, and don't take your brain too seriously.